Hello, welcome to another Nimbus webinar. And today we're going to be diving into the crucial topic of building profitable agency contracts. I'm thrilled to be joined by Tiffany today. Tiffany Kemp, hello. She's the CEO of Devant, a leading authority in commercial management and contract law with a proven track record as a deal maker and a contract expert. So Tiffany empowers businesses to foster strong and more lucrative partnerships through strategic contracting. So we are fortunate to have her today to share and impart her wisdom. So welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's a
So
pleasure.
look, navigating the complexities of agency sort of client contracts can be quite overwhelming. But with the right approach, these can be quite a powerful tool in your arsenal and protect both you and your client as well. So Tiffany's going to guide us through her proven sort of contract strategies, covering things like preventing scope creep. That's a very big challenge for agencies, ensuring timely payment, and ultimately boosting agency profitability. So I'm going to hand over to Tiffany, and I'm going to let you, push on and get started.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mike. It's lovely to be here. And it's really good to work with Nimbus on this project. We've had a super time working with you, and we'll be sharing some of the resources that we've been developing together with Nimbus at the end, so you can go and dig into more detail if you'd like to. If you have questions as you go along, please post them in the chat and Mike will share them with us as we go through. And if there are any other questions that crop up after the event, then give us a shout, drop us an email, and you'll be able to find all our contact details in a bit. So just to get started, Mike talked about the building blocks of agency contracts and how it all gets a bit overwhelming sometimes, because you sort of look at contract stuff and it's almost as though they were designed to bamboozle and discombobulate you, when all you want to do actually is make a decent relationship with your client and ensure that you get paid a sensible amount and that nobody gets taken to the cleaners. I mean, that's generally the sort of outset. We all want to make a decent money and we want to make sure we deliver a really good service and the client's happy and refers us to everybody else. Now, although obviously there are devils in the detail when it comes to contracts, there are specifics in terms of language and how you say things. It really boils down to 3 questions that every contract has to answer. And so when you're looking at the documentation you put in place with yourself and your customer, these are the things that you need to have in mind, because a whole mountain of legalese won't protect you if you're not answering these key questions. The first one is who does what when, and we'll come to that in a little bit more detail in a mo. But if we don't know what is expected of us and what we expect of our client, the chances of this relationship going well are remote, I would say, to be generous. The next one is obviously a burning issue for all of us. If we're going to do all this wonderful work, when are we actually going to get paid, and what kind of things might get in the way of us getting paid or delay us getting paid? And the last one is, how are we going to handle it if it goes pear-shaped? Because with the best will in the world, things do go wrong. You know, any business, if a business has never had a mistake, has never had an issue in delivery, then it's obviously very new, is all I can say. You know, most of us who have been in business for more than 5 minutes, there's been the occasional issue at some point, and we want to know how we're going to go about resolving those. So the very top level building blocks are answering those 3 questions: who does what when does payment occur, and what happens if things go wrong. So we'll go into those in a little bit more detail now. So the first thing that Mike said we were going to be looking at was setting clear boundaries to avoid and mitigate the risk of scope creep. And that really sits in that first triangle, the who does what when triangle. If we think about what the client's expecting of us, I know from the work, Devant's done a lot of work with digital agencies. We have lots of digital agency clients. We're very privileged to consider ourselves part of the digital agency community. You're not all the same. You're not all the same. Just because you're a digital agency and you know other digital agencies, you're not all delivering the same stuff. Some of you might be delivering custom websites. You might be focused on e-commerce. You might be pay-per-click geniuses. You might be amazing content generators, or you might do all of those things for different clients on different days of the week. And sometimes in our sales conversations, it can be easy to get caught up in a bit of hyperbole. Yeah, you know, sign up with us. We've generated 50% year-on-year growth for the clients that we've worked with in the past, and we can do that for you too. When we start out in our relationship with a client, step 1 is being really clear about what they can expect from us. And one of the reasons this causes so many challenges for us and for agency businesses in general is we get very passionate about what it is that we're delivering and the benefits and the value of what it is that we're delivering. And occasionally, particularly if you're dealing with what I would call an immature client or a less sophisticated client who may not have purchased these kind of services before, their expectations of what's going to happen as a result of your work may be a tad unrealistic. You all hear the old thing about, oh, the wonderful thing about marketing is nobody knows which bits actually work, and if we knew which half it was that actually delivered the value, then we wouldn't bother doing the other half. But we never know what that's going to be and what impact our work is going to have until we're well in the line and we can tweak and course correct. But when we have that initial conversation with the client about what we're going to do for them, we need to boil that down into something clear and measurable that we know we're actually able to deliver. So identifying what we're going to do, writing it down in words that are clear and unambiguous, and making sure that it's realistic and that we're confident that we can actually deliver what we say we're going to deliver is a really good first step. Now, I'm guessing most of you, you've been in business for a little while. You think, yeah, we've got that nailed. We know exactly how to do that. Put your metaphorical hands up if you have in your proposals with your client a page that says assumptions and dependencies. Yeah, anybody got one of those? And what kind of things might you put on your assumptions and dependencies list? Mike, I'm going to ask you a question, a bit back to front this. So back to your agency days, what kind of assumptions and dependencies might you have had as an agency for your client? What sort of things might you have wanted them to do?
Things like being providing assets on time, or providing the things that they need to do on a timely manner. Because I'm sure, as an agency, we used to make sure that we delivered on time, but quite often, clients would not be delivering on time.
They want to be doing those things, and generally there'd be lots of those things that they would say, yeah, we'll do that. We've got to generate the content for this campaign or for this web page or whatever it is. And so you're sat there, you've got your wireframes already, you've got all the places, you've got all the styling done, you've got all the branding all beautiful, and you're ready to plug it in, and nobody can do anything. You can't take it live until you've got their content. They may have suggested that they were going to do it because they thought it would save them some money. They don't want to pay you to write it if they can write it themselves. Or they may just think that they're going to do a better job of it than you. And one of the challenges of working in a digital agency is it's a bit like being a photographer. Everyone's got a phone, everyone's got a camera, everyone's got a keyboard. A lot of your clients will think, yeah, I could do that. But actually it's not their day job and they're not very good at it. And because it's not their day job, they may not do it in the time scale that you need it. So when you're setting out those assumptions and those dependencies, in the same way that we need to have a clear spec for what we're going to deliver to the client, we need a clear spec for what we expect from them. And we need to make sure that that's realistic too. So if they're saying they're going to produce the content for the website, and you've got this framework that says, okay, we're going to have these main pages with these service descriptions or something further down, do they have in your experience, do they actually have the competency to create that content in a way that is going to deliver for the website? Do they have the experience and expertise to do it at all? Might be one question, but can they do it to standard? And if not, how can you diplomatically manage that process? Because what tends to happen if our client doesn't deliver the things that we're expecting of them, one of two things will occur. Either we will stop, so we can't make any progress because they haven't delivered the assets that they were supposed to deliver. So we'll put that on the back burner. We'll try to find other work for our staff to do when we had expected them to be working on that project. If we can't, maybe we've only got a 2 or 3 day wait, which is almost worse than having a 2 or 3 week wait because it's very difficult to fill that with some other chargeable work. Do we charge the client? So when we're looking at what we put in the contract and these assumptions and dependencies, What happens if they don't deliver on time? Do we want to specify that we have the right to charge them for our time spent waiting for those deliverables? Because you've got people sat on the bench that can't do anything creative while they're waiting. Or would we say, okay, we'll get on with other useful things that we can do on your project, but if things overrun, you're not going to hold us responsible for that, because if you deliver assets to us out of sequence, then we might have to reschedule things. We might have booked some specialist time to deal with particular elements of your project that we're now not able to use because you haven't delivered your assets on time. Could we do that thing for them? So if they're saying, we'll provide you the content, we'll provide you with the service descriptions, and you know that they're going to get super busy with their day-to-day work, it's going to go to the bottom of the pile, they're not going to get round to it. How about just booking a session with them face-to-face or online and saying, right, talk to me about your product, talk to me about your service. I'll take some notes, I'll draft some copy, you can review it, tell me if I've got it wrong. Obviously, we can charge them for that. So it's an upsell opportunity. It's about being realistic about what sort of things are likely to happen in your project and putting practical strategies in place to help you deal with them up front. So having that conversation, making sure that the dependencies and assumptions are sufficiently clearly drafted that you can rely on them, that you can say, no, Mr. Customer, you haven't actually done the thing that you said you were going to do for us. So that means these consequences kick in, whether that's you paying for our time on the bench or us stepping in to do it for you and charging it for you or charging it to you, or whatever that consequence might be.
Tiffany, you mentioned there, just want to pick up on something you said, because that you said conversation. I think a conversation is important. So when we had contracts in the agency I used to run previously, we would build the website. Often the client would say, I'll create the content. And we know 9 times out of 10, they weren't going to do that, or they weren't going to deliver on time. But we did have a clause in our contract that would say we would start charging them for the site. If it went over a certain period of time, we would have, obviously we'd have a process where we would build a site and then it would go onto a subscription model. We would kick in the subscription model if they delayed it and start charging them regardless. Now, I must admit, that was much more difficult to have that conversation than, and it wasn't just me, I've got a team of people who then feel that they need to, they've built up a relationship with that individual. Having a commercial conversation can be difficult for some team members. So how would you propose that is handled in the right way to get the right outcome, so you don't annoy the client, but also being clear that this was in the contract?
That's a really good question. And actually, it brings in one of the most important things about having a contract, which is that you talk about it. So having it in the small print somewhere so that you can rely on it if it all goes pear-shaped is one thing. That's generally pretty uncomfortable and expensive and difficult to manage. If you use your contract as part of your sales process, and you use it as evidence that you have a project management process, actually, this is how you manage projects, and you act preemptively to say, right, are you really comfortable that you can deliver that content to us by this date? Because that seems a bit tight given that you've got your day job. What will you do if that slips? How would you like us to handle that if that slips? Would you like us to step in and do that for you? That'll be an extra 10 grand or whatever it's going to be. But having that conversation at the outset and saying, that we're going to have these great resources that you've met during our pitch process lined up to leap into action with doing this piece of work. Once we've got that content, if you don't deliver it to us, those resources are not going to be productive for that period. So we are going to have to charge you, whether it's starting your subscription early or whatever it is, we're going to have to charge you some money. We don't want to be doing that without you getting value. You don't want to be paying for that without getting value. So how can we work together to avoid that happening? And just flashing it up as early as you can. Right, you're ready to deliver your stuff to us on Monday. Brilliant. Okay, is that running a bit slow? What can we do to help? This is our day rate for helping, but at least we're not going to be in that position when you're paying for a live site that you haven't got yet. So it is about saying, we are your friends. We're here to help you. You understand that this is how our process works and we have to manage it because we have to make sure we're available to support you when you need us, as well as our other customers where they need us. And if we're sat twiddling our thumbs waiting for assets that were promised and haven't delivered, we're not going to be able to meet that commitment to you or to anybody else. So it's about making it an early conversation.
Mhm.
And not being scared of the contract. The more often we talk about it, the less painful it gets. It is one of those things. It's about sort of take a deep breath, take a deep breath and say, great, well, I want to talk you through this section of the contract that we've got here about how we work with our clients and what we expect of you and what you can expect of us. It's fair, it's even-handed, but we both have to know these are the rules. We can agree to change them if we want to. If we both agree that there are extenuating circumstances, we can make an amendment. But this is generally here to give us a framework so we both know how to work together. And
So it's about not being scared to have that conversation, and also just having it up front, I suppose, as part of the pitch and sales process to weave into the conversations about here's the roles and responsibilities that we've agreed to go through. And it's in a contract, because I suppose contractually always seems a bit more serious, I suppose. Is there a softer process to be here it is in our presentation and pitch work that we, when we get further down the line, these are the things that we're agreeing to, and it's like the scope of work, I suppose.
And it's part of the scope of work. It's about how we work, how you will engage with us. That's the conversation that you can pull into your pitch deck as this is how we will work with you. One of the problems a lot of clients have working with marketing agencies is that they feel it takes a lot longer than they were told it was going to take at the beginning. Now, that's their perception. A lot of the time, that's because they haven't done the things they were supposed to have done when they were supposed to have done them. So in every relationship, and the agency client relationship is a particularly intense one of these, it's a dance. It needs both of you to tango. Neither of you can do it on your own. And being very clear with the client about how that works and how your knowledge and expertise is going to help you manage them so that they can get the outcomes they want. It builds confidence. It makes them feel they're in safe hands. There will be agencies out there that are going to BS their way through the process. Oh, yes, you don't need to do anything. We're going to do it all for you. And a sensible client will know that's nonsense. It's just not going to work. So having that conversation and making it about how to drive a successful outcome for everybody, rather than here's the tiny print, I'm now going to hit you over the head with the contract, you nasty client. That's a much more positive way to engage with it. So I think having something that's in your pitch deck that refers to how you manage that process is really helpful. And not believing what the client tells you when they say, oh yeah, we can do that. Or at least gently probing and saying, that's great. We know that people get busy and they might not be able to. I'm sure you're super organized, Mr. Client, but we have had clients in the past who have delivered their stuff late and it's been full of typos and it's needed rewriting. Now, I'm obviously not expecting that to happen with you because you guys are amazing. But if there are any hiccups, this is how we'll deal with it. And we're here to help. So it's about thinking about where things might go wrong and getting in there early to try to prevent it going wrong, but making sure that the contract is clear enough that if it does go wrong, you've got a very clear way of dealing with it that hopefully won't come as a surprise to the client. You don't want them to feel that you're smuggling this small print past them so that you can use it to beat them up at a later stage, because nobody really likes that. So being really open and upfront with it, I think, is critical.
You've got a point here, which is about evolution of a contract as well, which I like the idea of. And I suppose there's I don't know, you could argue, maybe a client argues the evolution of a contract could be that now you need to do the content because I can't do it. But there might be evolutions over time. And I suppose, when I was running an agency, we had contracts that things did evolve. I guess I'm on the other side of the fence now, where I'm employing an agency to do work for us, and sometimes things do need to evolve. I'm not signing a contract every month to say this is the difference of what we're doing. But I suppose, at what point does an evolution of contract or a new contract need to be drafted or signed because things have evolved?
It depends on what sort of services your agency delivers, frankly. So there's a difference between slightly extending the scope of a particular category of services or adding a completely new service that might need new terms. So web development and PPC, for example, are two very different services that have different parameters, different variables. So you might have some different bits of your T's and C's that you need if a client's buying pay-per-click that are totally irrelevant if they're buying web development. So depending on how your standard terms are structured, you might have every single thing in one massive great big document. So regardless of what they're buying, they get the terms for PPC and web development, even if they're only buying one of those things. Or you might have something a bit more flexible that allows you to sort of pull in terms for other services as and when. So one structure that works well for a lot of agencies is to have a sort of framework and then have separate statements of work for each different chunk of stuff that's being done. So you could have one statement of work for your pay-per-click, one for your web development, one for your content generation, whatever that, one for your email marketing campaigns. And each of those will have its relevant terms. So if you have that structure, it means when the client says, oh, you've done such an amazing job on our website, now we want to hire you to do a PPC campaign for us, then you just execute another statement of work for that new campaign. So that's kind of clear because they're very different chunks. The bit that gets a bit trickier is you've been doing our web development and actually we've decided now we want a microsite as well as this thing you've done for us here. We want this whole other branded microsite here that's got to pick off these bits from the main site and have its own whatever widgets. That's a change of the scope of the first piece of work. And it's important to know how you work as a business, how you do stuff, and how you practically manage change, and have a process captured in your contract documentation that supports that. So if you are a bit seat of the pants as an agency, and I'm not saying that as a criticism, it's dynamic and nimble, so a lot of good words that come with that too. But if you know that's how you are and you're not great at documentation, don't have something in your contract that says all changes have to be signed in writing by authorized representatives of both parties. Because what will happen is you'll never get round to doing it. You and your client will have a chat, you'll swap some emails and they'll say, oh, can you do this little microsite? And you'll say, yeah, great, it'll be another $5 grand. And they say, oh, that sounds splendid, fantastic, crack on. You will never get round to actually getting something sent out and signed by both of you. Because as far as you're concerned, you've done it, you've agreed it. And then when you come to invoice, if they say, oh, we're not paying that $5 grand, you say, well, hang on a minute, we had emails. Yeah, but the contract says any changes are going to be signed in writing, and it wasn't signed in writing, so therefore we don't have to pay for it. Then you find yourself up the creek without a paddle. So don't create a contract process that your business isn't going to be able to support when it comes to changes. If you're happy with changes being agreed by email, put that in the contract. If you need to specify particular levels or even names of individuals that have to sign stuff off, put that in the contract. So the important thing is that your contract reflects reality. It needs to be workable and you need to follow it. Because if you create a really detailed contract change process, but your team has never actually read your contract and they haven't got a clue what it says and they just crack on and do their stuff as they normally would, then your contract is of no use to you. Yeah, it's a complete waste of pixels. I was going to say waste of paper, but you've probably never printed it out. So whatever you put in your contract, it has to match what happens in real life. And this is where using your experience of working with your clients and working with your team is really important. And if you're getting new terms drafted, whoever you work with to do that, and we can do that for you, whoever you work with to do that needs to understand what your reality looks like so that they can make sure that the contract they create for you lines up with that reality and allows your contract to support your day-to-day reality rather than being a problem for it. And the last wee point on this slide is about fixed points of reference, because a lot of agency projects are fluid. You might not, depending on the nature of something. I mean, let's say you're doing a brand redevelopment for somebody. How long is a piece of string? How long is that going to take? How many loops around, how many iterations is it going to take to get to a new brand identity that that client is happy with? And if you're doing something on a day rate or an hourly rate basis, that's not necessarily a problem because you just keep going. You just keep going, you keep charging until they get to a point where they're happy, provided that they're satisfied that the process that you've used has been a good one. if they've asked you to give them some kind of fixed price quote, then at some stage you will have spent all the money. So you need to figure out, how do you know when you've done it? Is it, we've spent this number of days, we've done this many iterations, we've done this many variants for you? What are the metrics that make sense for your business and the particular services that you're offering? Because this stuff, the who does what when, is the linchpin for everything. Lack of clarity, lack of understanding, and lack of consistent application of the contract in this area tends to generate problems in pretty much every other area. So most contract disputes arise out of this bit going wrong. So this is the bit, if you could spend most of your time on any one bit, this is the bit that's going to deliver the best bang for buck, because getting this wrong, not being clear here, is more likely to cause problems than pretty much anything else that you do from the contractual front.
How fixed should we be though? Because I got a good example where we had a client, we said up to, we would write content for them up to 1,000 words article, and lo and behold, every time we delivered one, they would count the words, and then if it was 900, 950, they'd be back on us and say you haven't delivered to the 1,000.
We want a discount. I want a 10% discount.
Yeah. See, oh my life. But
yeah.
you know,
yeah.
But that's the issue. So I guess how fixed should we be, and how can we make sure that there is a bit of flex, but it safeguards both parties, I suppose?
And I guess it's about thinking about, where's the value coming from? So in an example like that, we might say, we will write X number of pieces for you with an average word count of X, or with a word count of between X and Y, if you want to give yourself a little margin for error, unless we agree otherwise. Because we might agree that actually for this particular topic, 500 words is far better than 1,000, because no one's going to want to read 1,000 words on this. We might also say, okay, because we did a 500 word piece there, we'll do a 1,200 word piece on this other thing that is going to be much easier to talk about if we've got a little bit more space to talk about it. So a lot of this boils down to your experience of your clients and the kinds of services that you offer. There will always be a bit of trial and error. The contract is what will kick in if you can't agree something else with the client. So if you think that actually for this particular thing, we need to agree something else, having that contract conversation early is really helpful. In the worst case, if your client says, no, we absolutely have to have 1,000 words, that's great. We'll do some summaries. We'll put some little summaries and repeat stuff. You didn't say there had to be unique words, did you? But it's a challenge, and you're not likely to get it right. But hopefully, if you've built up the relationship by being really clear with the client about what the objectives are and how you're going to work together, if you do need to flex, and if they need to flex, then you can agree that within the bounds of the contract. The contract should hopefully help you to stop either you or them taking the mick and not delivering what was anticipated. Yeah, there's no accounting for people that will do a word count and ask for money off. There's a lovely quote that's been attributed to everybody from Mark Twain to Cicero, which is, you know, dear auntie, I'm sorry to write you such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. It's often much more difficult to write something short and to the point than it is to waffle on for ages. So you can say, okay, you're lucky, Mr. Customer, we're not charging you a premium for your 900 word piece instead of 1,000. So we'll discount it on this occasion. Right, payment. So although I know that you love what you do, you love working with your agency clients, and every day is a fun day when you're doing something that you love, ultimately you still got to put food on the table and pay your team. So actually getting paid is a critical part of running a successful agency business. And it's interesting how much this eats away at your profit margins, just not getting paid what you thought you were going to get paid when you thought you were going to get paid it. Because somebody has to chase those invoices, somebody has to start juggling cash because there was cash that you thought was going to come in the business this month. Customer hasn't paid, you don't get the cash in till later on in the process. And that's a headache that we could all do without, frankly. So the first step in that is all the stuff we were talking about on the last slide, making sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. Because often the first time we realize that something has gone a bit wrong is when a client doesn't pay. So having clear invoicing milestones, things that say, we can invoice you when we have achieved these things, when we have done these things, is our first step. And making sure that that is really crisp and objectively measurable helps to avoid disputes when the client says, oh, well, it was only 900 words, not 1,000 words. I'm not paying you for it yet. So we need to know how we can tell as a business that we've done what we need to do to be allowed to invoice. So all that stuff we were talking about a moment ago, absolutely get that nailed. We also need to understand what their processes are, particularly if you're lucky enough to start working with some really big blue chip clients. They will all have their own invoice process that might say, you've got to use their tool, you've got to go into Cooper or SAP or whatever else it is that they're using. You've got to put the purchase order number in. You've got to have things signed off by John in product development or whatever it is. You need to understand how that process works, and don't rely on the head of marketing or whoever it is that you've been working for to tell you how that process works, because they've never had to invoice. They've never had to invoice the company. They're on a salary, for goodness sake. The money just lands in their bank every month. They don't have to chase for it. They may have absolutely no clue how suppliers get paid. And if that sounds daft, it is a commercial reality. Ask the question, how does it work? What happens if I submit an invoice? Who does it go to? What is the actual process? Because you'll also find some of these clients will sign a contract that's got your terms that says payment on 30 days because they haven't read it. They haven't even looked at it. Their business is congenitally incapable of paying anything before 90 days because they're useless. Now, if that's the case, you want to find out about that first, ideally, because you need to plan your cash flow. You need to figure out how you're going to manage that. You might be able to manage it, for example, by agreeing that you can invoice some things early in order to allow them to pay on, say, 60-day terms. So you might say, okay, we're going to charge you an upfront deposit for this work. And at the end of the month, if our days incurred has exceeded that deposit amount, then we'll invoice you for the balance. So you can start to get a little bit ahead of the curve and pull money in when the business needs it, rather than waiting until you've delivered everything, then issuing your invoice, then waiting 3 months to get your cash. So it's about being open with the client, asking them questions, accepting that the person you're selling to may have no clue what the answers are, but being comfortable just saying, brilliant, would you mind putting me in touch with someone in accounts payable? Can I just have a quick chat with them so that I can understand how the process works from their point of view? Oh, great. Oh, you're off on a holiday for a month, touring South America during August. Excellent. Can I get you to approve the work before you go? Because otherwise they won't process our invoice. So thinking about those tedious nuts and bolts elements will help you manage that payment process. Put a note there. Remember the difference between invoicing, which is when you're able to issue your invoice, and payment, which is when they have to pay it. So your invoicing milestones are when you've ticked the boxes that say, yep, we can issue an invoice now. Payment is about how many days they have to pay an invoice once you've sent it. So those two things are distinct. And your contract should set out both of those things. It should say how many days they have to pay. And it then needs to say, what happens if they don't? So I don't know if you've ever had a client pay late, or all of your clients pay bang on time. I don't know, have you ever had that, Mike? Have you ever had a client not pay on time? Just think back into the mists of time.
Rarely, to be honest. They've all been amazing. Yeah, no, definitely not. So yeah, lots of clients not paying on time. I think the thing is like, what do you do at that point, and how long do you leave it?
Yeah.
I suppose for us, we also had finance people to chase these things, make sure they're coming in. But yeah, slightly different to us now, where we're in our hosting business. Sometimes we have people on direct debit and they cancel direct debit and they don't cancel the services. So then you've got to chase those guys, So what's going on there? So yeah, late payment is a headache. And I liked your point a minute ago as well about corporate versus smaller businesses on payment terms, because that is I think a perennial issue. Some businesses can go under if they're not paid within 30 days or they're saying 90 days or not at all. And that's quite frightening. So yeah, Payment is incredibly important.
So generally, we would advocate having some good remedies in your contract for late payment. So you might have an option to suspend service delivery. Now, if you're talking about hosting, that's pretty darn scary. So, to say, we will suspend your hosting, your website will go dark. Nobody will be able to access your CRM system. That's quite a serious threat. And you might think, oh my gosh, there's no way we could ever have that conversation with the client, because they would just hate us and they wouldn't want to do business with us. And when it comes down to renewal, they will say, not with a barge pole. So being aware of what those remedies might be and flagging them up to the client in advance, again, super helpful, because nobody wants to have things sprung on them. Generally, reasons why people don't pay. Let's just run through that really quickly. One reason people will not pay is because they don't think they've got what you're asking them to pay for. So that comes back to the previous slide. You haven't delivered the thing that, as far as they're concerned, entitles you to raise an invoice. So that's down to scope and management and change control, all those good things. And often when somebody doesn't pay your invoice, it's the first clue that you have that you haven't met their expectations with delivery. So it can be an extremely valuable, although not very good timing, indicator that all is not well in the project delivery. And that can be a useful flag in and of itself. But sometimes clients don't pay because they've got an accounts payable team who are rewarded on how long they can string it out for, how long they can leave cash in their bank account and not your bank account. And if that's the case, you just need to get after them. You need to absolutely hassle the living daylights out of them, consistently and politely and in accordance with your contract, but don't let them off the hook, because essentially, and sad though it is, they say the squeaky wheel is the one to get oiled. If they are trying to avoid paying people just because they don't want to pay out cash, they want to keep hold of it, then the party that is most annoying will get paid first. And that is just a fact of life, because all of us will generally act to get rid of an annoying person who's hassling us for funds. Those ones, if you do have a remedy like suspending service, that can be a really useful thing to flag up. Now, bear in mind that your customer, the person that actually brought you in to do agency work for them, to do some creative stuff for them, may have no connection whatsoever, particularly if it's a bigger corporate, with accounts payable. They may have no idea about that process. And they may be deeply embarrassed to know that their business hasn't paid you, because they think you're great, you've done a fabulous job, and of course we should pay you. But old Mavis in accounts payable, she's got other ideas. So using your client to say, look, you've got to talk to Mavis. If the money's not in the bank by close of play Friday, your website's going dark, and that's really not going to be a good look. And that's on you. That's not on us. Having that conversation and getting them to manage their internal people can be a way of escalating and accelerating. If you don't want to take that route, interest. Now, so many people have said to me, oh, we've never charged interest. We would never charge interest because we'll upset our customers. They'll never do business with us again. And I have to ask the question, what is a customer? Anybody might, you want to give me an answer? I should have prepped you for this in advance.
Oh, no. What is a
Give me a
customer?
definition of a customer.
Oh gosh, somebody who's buying our services effectively, and we're there to deliver them for them, but at a commercial contracts between each other, right? They need something from us that we can deliver at a price.
At a price. So the at a price bit, the buying bit, there's a kind of an implication there that they're going to pay. Yeah. So a customer is somebody who pays you for stuff. Somebody who takes stuff and doesn't pay, there's another whole term for that. And that's not a customer. So if they're taking your goods or your services, they should pay in accordance with the contract. So to say, if you don't pay when you say you're going to pay, we're going to charge you interest, is actually absolutely fine and reasonable. It's not bad-tempered of you. It's not poor customer service. It's, we're doing our bit, now you have to do your bit. Now, there's a lovely little website called payontime.co.uk. Sorry, I didn't put that in the slide. payontime.co.uk, where they have an interest calculator. So if you have a client who is late in paying, you can specify the amount that's owing, the date that it was due. And if you haven't put any contract interest rate in your contract, then the Late Payment of Commercial Debts Interest Act will specify 8% above base rate. That's right, 8% above base. So that's actually worth having. That's a decent amount of interest. Now, you might say, well, if they're not paying the invoice, they're certainly not going to pay the interest invoice. So what's the point in raising that one? It can be a useful tool to nudge people into paying your main invoice, to say, if you pay us by Friday, we will waive our right to interest under the Late Payment of Commercial Debts Interest Act. Otherwise, we're going to be sending you another invoice for 122 quid 50 on Monday, which covers our late payment fees and interest up to Monday. And that interest will be continuing to accrue at roughly £3.72 per day. So we'll invoice you another interest invoice in another week or something. That can be a good way of just getting people moving if they're being a pain. Being consistent, and if you're lucky enough to have a finance team that can chase invoices, encouraging them to be consistent, to be really prompt, really polite, really consistent in asking for payment and issuing notices that they're now incurring interest, and if you pay by this date, we'll waive our right to interest on this occasion, otherwise we'll be issuing you an invoice for this, can be a really good nudge just to get that money in. Now,
what happens if they don't pay at all?
If they don't pay at all. So that's when we get into serious things going wrong territory. So different reasons for saying we're actually not going to pay. So we could have actually we terminated the service. We didn't want the service anymore, so we're not going to pay for it. Now, if you haven't breached the contract, if you've done everything as you should have done, some contracts have a provision in them which is called termination for convenience. So it allows the client to say, we can stop using your services and we can terminate this contract on X days notice. And this is what works, what happens in that situation. Now, you can, because it's not an automatic right, the whole idea of having a contract is that you're both tied to it, you're both bound by it. Nobody's automatically allowed to just say, nah, fed up, I'm going to take my ball and go home. It is a benefit that you're giving to the customer if you're going to give them the right to terminate for convenience. So you can charge for it. You can say, yeah, you can. If you've signed up for a rolling 12-month contract, but you want to pull the plug on a month's notice, you have to pay a termination fee of, I don't know, 10% of the outstanding rest of the year, or 50% of the outstanding rest of the year, or something that compensates you for whatever upfront investment you might have made into that you've maybe amortized across the duration, the planned duration of the contract. If they're just saying we're not paying because we don't want to pay, no, Yabu sucks, what are you going to do about it? Then you have the choice of what are you going to do about it? And how can the contract protect you if they haven't held up their end of the bargain? If they haven't disputed your invoice, so if they haven't come back and said, you did a really rubbish job of this content, the articles that you wrote were full of typos and were totally irrelevant to my target market, so I'm not paying for them. That's a different set. We'll come to that in a second. If you haven't actually done anything wrong and they haven't alleged that you've done anything wrong, they're just not paying. Depending on the size of the debt, you can either go to the small claims court, and you can do small claims online if it's 10 grand or less, or you can make a claim for an award for summary judgment for payment of the debt. So there are legal avenues that you can go through. The small claims online process is fairly straightforward. And if you've got evidence, which hopefully if you've done the first two steps right, you will have some nice evidence that you had an agreed scope and that you delivered the agreed scope and that they signed it off if they were required to sign it off, and if they weren't, that you can evidence that you've delivered whatever you've delivered, and they haven't disputed the invoice, then you can get a court to say, yes, we will tell them that they have to pay your invoice. Now, that results in your client getting a county court judgment against them, which is obviously not great for their point of view. And often just the threat of that, sending a letter before action to say, this is what we're going to do, can be enough to kick them into action and make them pay. Obviously, if the amount is a lot bigger, then you need to be really comfortable that you have done everything that you were supposed to do, because if you start issuing proceedings, what's the first thing that happens if somebody says, I'm going to sue you for not doing X? What's your natural response as a person if somebody starts lobbing grenades in your general direction? I know, Mike, what would you do?
What would I do? I'd want to see the evidence of it, but I'd also be pushing back to say, well, actually, that's not the case. I'd hope that there was a conversation before that. Hope that there's something that's happened way before these conversations, before we got to this point. It just popped up. I think I'd be angry that it's got to that stage without a conversation. Especially, I feel like it's unjust, accusation. So yeah, I would want a conversation, and I wouldn't be happy, but you would certainly need to see some evidential stuff, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it absolutely would. And what tends to happen, so as I said at the top of this slide, one of the reasons people don't pay is because they don't think that they've got what you're asking them to pay for. And so if a client is refusing to pay and you start making a noise about, oh, well, we really do need you to pay, otherwise we're going to have to take some more action, they will often then push back with reasons why they shouldn't pay. So they will then come up with, well, you were late delivering this, or this was of poor quality, or whatever. And that, as Mike says, is where we need to have some evidence. But we need to be aware that it's very unusual for a project to go wrong in a purely one-sided way. Most of the times, if things have gone wrong, there's been a little bit of fault on both sides. So it might be that maybe your content wasn't tip-top on this particular subject, and maybe that's because the client subject matter expert who was supposed to brief you didn't turn up. You scheduled 3 meetings and they cancelled all of them at the last minute, and so you had to kind of do it off Mr. Google. So there might be reasons why things went wrong. And one of the things I really like you said there, Mike, is you would be really upset if this was the first you'd heard of it. And that's absolutely right. What we want is to encourage a dialogue with the client as we're going through the project, so that if there are project problems or issues, they get flagged up when there's still time to do something about them. And one of the things that's worth sharing with your team on this is that includes client non-performance. So if you were, for example, creating some content and you were relying on the client to give you access to some subject matter experts who never turned up for your meetings, you might think, well, I don't really want to moan. I don't want to upset this person. They're really important in the client's organization. I don't want to tell tales and say, well, do you know, he's bumped my last 3 meetings with him and I've got to get the content out, so I'm going to have to make something up. But equally, if you don't flag it up, the client might not know there's a problem. As far as they're concerned, it's all ticking along. So when you deliver poor quality content, they don't know that they've contributed to that. They haven't had a chance to go and shake their subject matter expert by the metaphorical lapels and say, come on, you've got to do this meeting. I know you're busy, but this is important. So to avoid getting into that situation, if you can see things are slightly starting to go off the rails, bring it up with the client. Do it quickly. Do it in writing. Can I have a chat with you? Type your email. Can I have a chat with you? We've got a bit of an issue because we've been waiting for this content or for this whatever it is, and it's having an impact on our ability to deliver. So flag it up quickly. Hopefully then you will be able to resolve it amicably, and you're never going to get anywhere near courts, because frankly, courts are a waste of time and money and energy and emotion and sleep and all those things. You really don't want to go there if you can avoid it. But the best way to avoid it is by keeping on top of stuff as you go along. So our second bullet under here is, how can the contract protect us if things haven't gone well? So if we haven't delivered perhaps what we should have done, there are various provisions that you can put in the contract that will manage your exposure. So they will limit your liability for client costs if you have done something and you are at fault. So it's worth knowing what those are. Ultimately, you don't want to find yourself there. The best way to avoid having to pay out damages to disgruntled clients is not to have disgruntled clients. So that kind of is self-evident, I think. But ultimately, if you have done something wrong, chances are that your contract will have some provisions around you being given an opportunity to remedy. So in the termination provisions, there will usually be something that says, if the breach is capable of remedy, the breaching party hasn't breached it within 30 days. If that's the case, then the customer can terminate. So make sure that if a customer tells you there's something wrong, that you take action to fix the problem. Because if you take action to fix the problem, then you can avoid them having the right to terminate. If they attempt to terminate and they're not lawfully allowed to, then you have other remedies. And I'll talk in a little bit about the other resources that we've got to go into that in a little bit more detail for you. One of the questions that Mike asks, which a lot of our digital agency clients ask, is, what if we want to fire the client? Actually, what if we start working with this client, we discover they're a complete nightmare and we want to ditch them? It's really unusual to have an option in a contract for a supplier to terminate for convenience. So it's not nice to have an option for the customer to terminate for convenience, but there are very few clients who will agree that the supplier can terminate for convenience if they don't like you. One mechanism that we've used at Devant in the past with some of our agency clients for this is the idea of having a break point. So particularly if you're in a new relationship with a client and you don't know what they're going to be like to work with, you don't know how easy to work with they are, how well they're going to fulfill their obligations, you might want to specify a kind of preliminary phase of the project, which gives you a chance to get to know each other a bit, make sure that you are a good cultural fit and a good operational fit, and to say at the end of that period, either of us can walk away if we don't think this is going to be a good fit. And that can be an absolute lifesaver, because it can prevent you from being stuck with a client that is a real nightmare to deal with. Alternatively, if they're that bad, hopefully, if you go back to the slide a couple of slides ago, if you've been really clear about what your expectations are of the client and what remedies are available to you if they don't meet those expectations, they might actually be a material breach of the contract, and that might allow you to terminate the contract for their breach. But obviously it's better if we don't go there. And last of all, because I'm aware that time has been scooting away and we're nearly at an hour, Mike and I was like, oh, have we got enough to talk about for an hour? What if we've hired somebody else? So if we're using another agency to do some bits of work that perhaps aren't our niche, or we've engaged a freelancer for a particular piece of work, and what if they don't perform? How do we deal with that? The first point to remember is that our contract with our client is our responsibility. So if we've committed to, I don't know, including a chatbot, an AI-based chatbot within their website, and we don't know squat about AI, so we've actually hired another agency to do the AI chatbot element. If our contract with the client is for an entire website that includes an AI chatbot, and the AI chatbot guys are rubbish and they don't deliver it, then we are in breach of our obligations under the contract to deliver a website with an AI chatbot. So as far as the customer is concerned, they have the right to kick our bottom for not delivering that thing. So it's really important that whatever we put in place with the company that we're subcontracting to, it flows through the relevant provisions of our client contract so that we can manage them in line with that. Because we don't want to be in a position where our client is able to take action against us, but we haven't got anything to wield against our subcontractors. So that whole flow through piece is complicated to do well, because it's not going to be a direct flow through of the entire contract, because they're not delivering a website, they're just delivering that chatbot bit. And you might also want to have some slightly tighter timescales for performance from them, because you need to give yourself a bit of wriggle room so that if they don't deliver, you've got time to deal with them and still meet your client's expectations. So building in that margin for error into your subcontract relationships, so that if your subcontractor hasn't performed, you've got time to fix things with them and not put yourself in breach of your client contract, is really important. So it's definitely something that's worth thinking about, particularly if it's a sizable or really key component of your overall deliverables, to make sure that you're not squished between a rock and a hard place and you've got an underperforming contractor and a demanding client on the other side. So given where we are, I'm just going to share this with you and then be interested, Mike, in any closing thoughts that you've got. So the project of working with Nimbus has been brilliant. We've had a really great time together, and we've developed these 6 guides for you. They're each of them tackling different stages of the contracting process. And a lot of the things that we've talked about today are covered in more detail in here. So they're free, absolutely free. There's the link on here to the Devant webpage that talks about these guides. You can download them all from there. There is also a link that Mike will be able to share with those of you who are Nimbus clients, because they're all on the Nimbus site as well. We would love it if you would download them. Let us know if you've got any questions, any comments. Feel free to share them on social media, share them with your team. They're there to help answer some of the questions that you might have about how to use your contract effectively to build a more profitable and secure digital agency. If you find yourself getting stuck into those and you think, actually, I need a bit more info, I need some more insight, drop us a line at Devant, hello@devant.co.uk is the phone number. Go to the website, ping us a message, connect with me on LinkedIn. We would be really happy to help you through that minefield, because it shouldn't be painful, it should be fun, and it should be useful. But we know sometimes life doesn't quite go that way. So I'm going to stop that share. Good, it's done. So Mike, any further questions, thoughts, observations?
Yeah. Well, look, thank you. That was really informative and massively helpful. And hopefully those who are listening now will also find it incredibly helpful. So if anybody does have any questions, by all means, post it in the chat. But I've taken some things away, which I liked that you said, which was clear communication. So clearly communicate upfront and have it part of the sales process at the right time in that sales journey, and being clear. I think that's great. The other thing that you mentioned also, teams need to understand the contracts. And I think that is something that they're all a bit boring, they're all a little bit laborious, but people do need to read them so that they can use them to safeguard themselves, who you know, as the MD of the agency, I wasn't involved in day-to-day, right? So you're trusting those people, you're trusting your teams to be able to conduct themselves in the right way with that client. There is a little bit of flex, I guess, because you want to make sure that there is good customer experience, but that contract needs to be understood so that if things are going a little bit awry, that it can be brought out. I think the difficult part comes where you go, well, you let me have that for such and such a long time, but you know, that's another conversation to have. And then in the contracts, you talked about being clear, concise, and you know, not jargon really. And I think when it comes to legal speak, it can be really confusing. So I like that. I like the fact that you pointed that out. I think clarity and just being clear and plain is incredibly important. The large corporate that you mentioned, or the 90-day payment, which typically is larger businesses, I guess. I like the fact that you talked about maybe there's an additional contract for those where those terms are longer, so that you can bill up front for some of that work, which might still take 90 days, but at least you've got it in the post coming. You know you've got this, and I really like that idea, because I think I've certainly been sort of caught out in the past with those sorts of contracts, which are never nice. And also the sort of naivety of not asking, you know, so we've all probably been caught out by that, because we just assumed, well, that's our contract and they've just signed it, happy days. But then you go, oh no, sorry, you've now talked to the finance person who goes, that's never what we do, we never agree to that, so sorry, it's now this. And you're like, oh, that's not good for cash flow. So I like those ideas. Those are just some of my takeaways really, but I'm sure there's lots of others. And what we'll do at the back of this, we will write an article, we'll put some summaries out, we'll share that for everybody who hasn't listened today or hasn't been able to attend, but also just as a recap for those who have. But look, we've ran up to the hour. As you say, I was unsure whether we were going to have enough content, but we've covered loads. So thank you, Tiffany. I didn't it's been fascinating. So thank you very much. Thanks everybody else who's attended. And if you do have any questions, please do get hold of Tiffany and the guys at Devant, and they'll help you out. So thank you.
Thanks for having us, Mike. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.